Let's start with that breaking news out of Russia. We're getting reports that opposition politician Alexei Navalny is in a coma in a Siberian hospital with suspected poisoning. He was returning to Moscow when he fell ill during the flight. His plane made an emergency landing in the city of Omsk. Navalny's spokeswoman says that he's now in intensive care and is on a ventilator. Journalist Aleksandra Stojanovich-Godfroid is on the line now via Skype from Moscow. Alexandra, what more do we know of what happened?
So, Adrian, basically, he fell sick almost immediately after boarding that plane in Siberian town of Tomsk. Eyewitnesses say that he was screaming and then he lost his consciousness in the toilet, after which the plane made emergency landing in Omsk, where he was urgently hospitalized. According to his press secretary, Kira Yarmush, he had nothing but tea in one of the cafes airport that morning. So she is saying that they suspect that he's been actually poisoned. Doctors of this hospital are saying that his condition is rather serious, that they did perform tests and they will present results, though they did not specify when. His spokeswoman says that all of a sudden these doctors are not very cooperative. They did call the police, which is now taking protocols in the hospital itself. The said cafe in which Navalny had this last tea before boarding the plane promised to have their own investigation of what actually happened to, of course, their abilities. At this point, what we know is that he is in a coma, in a very serious condition, and they're waiting results with suspicion of some sort of poisoning.
If it is found that he has indeed been poisoned, this won't be the first time, will it?
No, it wouldn't be the first time, neither for Navalny nor for some other public figures that were critical of Putin and Kremlin. Navalny has been suspected poisoned last summer, almost a year to it now, when he was in custody of Moscow police. He was in prison for allegedly organizing mass protests in Moscow. Then he was also hospitalized, tests were performed, and then the doctors said that it's some sort of an allergy, but it was never presented to what, if it was an allergy, what it was, or if it was a poisoning, what sort of a poison it was. He was also attacked 3 years ago in 2017. Antiseptic green dye has been thrown into his face, which damaged his eye, and he's been treated for that for a rather long period of time. When it comes to other politicians, there are documented poisonings in London of Litvinenko, and then we had the Skripal case. Also, a prominent Russian journalist was once poisoned exactly in a plane, was without conscience for days on end.
Alexandra, many thanks indeed. Good to talk to you. Dara Macdool is head of Europe and principal Russia analyst at Verisk Maplecroft, a global risk consultancy. He joins us now from London. Dara, what are your thoughts on what may or may not have happened to Navalny?
Well, it's very difficult to paint a full picture of what has happened at the moment, given how quickly these events have happened. And equally, it's important to remember that while Vladimir Putin may try to present the image of a unified Russian government under his command, there is an old Russian saying that the Kremlin has many towers. We have seen in the past, most recently in 2015 with the assassination of Boris Nemtsov, that sometimes other actors will take matters into their own hands without Kremlin approval. Certainly at the moment, Russia is dealing with several different situations. The protests in Belarus, the potential negotiation of a new nuclear treaty with the U.S., and it's questionable as to whether or not this is an opportune time from the Kremlin's perspective to launch an operation of this kind. On the other hand, we are seeing rising protest sentiment in Russia, and most recently we've seen with the dismissal of Governor Furgal in Khabarovsk, which has brought tens of thousands of people out into the streets, that the Kremlin is worried about internal stability as well. So this may be a signal from Moscow to the broader opposition that the gloves are coming off, if you will. But equally, at this point, it could be any number of actors. Navalny's Foundation Against Corruption, FBK, has ruffled a lot of feathers, both at the national level and at the regional level. And it could be that that somebody in Siberia decided to take matters into their own hands at this point without Kremlin approval or even direction.
Yeah.
This is a developing story.
You're saying then that if there has been an attempt on Navalny's life, it's highly unlikely to have been officially planned or sanctioned by the Kremlin.
I wouldn't want to make a judgment on that, on whether or not this has the Kremlin's blessing. At this point, there just isn't enough information at this point to make that call. What I would say is that there's a number of ways that blessing might have come, not necessarily directly from Putin, but from another senior official who might have calculated that it was better to act and ask for forgiveness rather than to ask for permission on this point. But equally, in the past, the Kremlin has found that it can manage Navalny through occasional arrests when needed, through denying him access to the media, and that he's an irritant, essentially, to them. That would, the cost of arresting him or killing him or doing something extremely serious to him, such as what we've seen now, would outweigh the benefits. Now, the two possibilities here are either that calculation has changed, given the greater degree of unrest we've seen both in Russia and again in Belarus, and that the Kremlin is deciding that now the repression needs to be stepped up, or that somebody lower down the ranks was annoyed by something that Navalny did, again, maybe exposing the corruption of some particular local or regional official, and decided to take matters into their own hands. But this is literally this happened in the last couple of hours, as far as I can see. So really, we can't say with any certainty why this happened or who directed it at this point.
You say that the Kremlin views Navalny to a certain extent as an irritant. To what extent, though, is he a useful irritant as far as the Kremlin is concerned, in that to give some image of democracy, to project some image that there is that people do have a choice, and that they do need someone like Navalny to oppose the Kremlin, don't they?
To an extent, though, it's important to note that Navalny has been fairly ruthlessly kept off the ballot, except on one or two occasions. So, the kind of whether or not the role of kind of a false choice is more played by parties like the LDPR and the Communist Party, the so-called systemic opposition, who provide organized political opposition to the Kremlin, but without opposition. The bigger role for Navalny would be through his Fund Against Corruption, FBK, which has come up with a surprising amount of information on the illicit activities of a number of senior officials, which suggests that he does have some contacts within the security services or other agencies of the state who use him as a means of kind of laundering information about their enemies and conducting internal political battles of this type. Equally, there is a subset of the administrative elite, if you want, which knows that there may come a time in the future when there is a political transition in Russia. There's an economic transition in Russia, and that Navalny may be a part of that. And so they realize that as one of the few genuinely independent political actors in the country, they need to maintain some sort of relationship with him, or at least keep lines of communications open. That wouldn't rule out a poisoning of this kind, of course, because you can still communicate with somebody and then decide that it's time to get rid of them. But I would say you're reasonably on the mark there, in that having him around does bring some benefits to the Kremlin, even if on the balance I'd say they find him an irritant more than a useful tool.
Good to talk to you, Dara. Many thanks indeed. Dara Macdool there in London.
Thank you.